Welcome to Refiner's Fire. My name is Peter Blute. I'm the executive director here at Young Catholic Professionals. We are so glad to be back with you on this podcast where we talk about all things faith and work, and sometimes our amazing patron, St. Joseph the Worker, as well. So I'm thrilled today to be speaking with our guest, Brent Beabout. Brent, thanks so much for being here.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. So you have just an unbelievable background, right? From Navy to supply chain, both on the founder side, entrepreneurial, but also in the corporate sector. You also went through a conversion, so we've got a lot to talk about here. But maybe let's just start off with a little bit about your background. Maybe starting off with your faith. Tell us a little bit about what your faith was like growing up and how you ended up becoming Catholic.
Well, I've been blessed. Let's put it that way. It's probably starting there. I grew up in a household which was pretty much, I would call it almost fundamentalist. My parents had a massive conversion when I was about 5 years old. They were very on the wild side of life, if I can use that term. Had a massive conversion when I was about 5, and they kind of came into faith pretty quickly. It was an evangelical, almost fundamentalist type of faith. So I kind of grew up in a fairly strict household, if you will, under the Protestant type of tradition. Right? And so, there was no drinking, dancing, and smoking, so to speak, right, growing up. At least they were trying to convince me of that as I became a teenager, et cetera. Which was good, but I was also very grounded in the faith with Bible reading, knowledge of the scriptures, prayer. That was very much part of us growing up, and I got a great foundation when I was young. And like most kids, by the time I got to college, we got a little bit wild, right? Kind of left our foundings a little bit. And I was no exception to that. I followed the same kind of rules, which is typical of most people, right? Kind of trying to feel the ropes, which is what ended up happening. As I left college eventually found my wife, we eventually got more serious about our faith. And I found as we started, once again, evangelical type of Christianity, going to churches. I moved a lot, as you know, I was ex-Navy, so we moved quite a bit. So as you move, you have to church shop everywhere you go, right? Because every church, even in the same denomination, can be very different, right? So
what are you looking for when you church shop? Is it the pastor? Is it
and generally
the people,
speaking,
what?
In the Protestant tradition, generally it's usually the pastor, is it Bible believing, et cetera. So it's kind of the basic. Every church can be different, especially if it's non-denominational, right?
Okay.
It's very much based on the local congregation there. Second part is it's got good music, is it uplifting, the people decide to be there, right? But a lot of it's about the personality of the pastor, frankly, and around the music, et cetera. Not always necessarily exactly what they believe. You're not reading the fine details, if they're even in print, right?
Yeah.
So it's always a little bit of a crapshoot, for lack of a better word, right? So you might church shop a little bit and find you made the wrong decision, do another one. Very frustrating, at least. So as I got more, involved in church, got older, we started looking for more liturgical type of service. We felt moved towards something that's a little more quieter, contemplative, et cetera. Long story short, we became Presbyterians over time. I had some issues, I think, theologically with some of the things they believed. But at the same time, I liked their order of worship and et cetera. And they had some sense of order to them, which I kind of liked, right? Long story short, 2012 hit. So that's about, 13 or so, 4 years ago. I was sitting in a Presbyterian church. We were members of that church in Florida at the time. And I heard a sermon that day that I thought, if my grandfather was sitting in that same old church in the same pew listening to the same sermon, he would have heard something 180 degrees out of what I heard today. How can that be?
Yeah.
And so I had a massive crisis of faith. I actually stopped going to church for that next year. Wow. I left the church. I said, this can't be true. But I didn't know what it was. Now, in hindsight, I found out, as I started exploring, and I'm one to read. That's kind of my reaction to things. I started reading. It's kind of like pulling a thread on a sweater. You just kind of pull one book, and they say that references another book, and you pull that thread. That's the way things end up happening right over time. And eventually, 3.5 years later, I found myself sitting in a Catholic church. And I realized with the word, like I said, what happened in 2012 for me was I saw a lack of accountability. There was nobody called balls and strikes in the Protestant church. And so a pastor, even inside of a denomination, could say whatever he wanted, and it could be right for that day. But that can't be true, because it'd be, once again, 180 degrees out what someone else preached, 5 years ago. So that's what was my problem was, or this my problem there, was led me to Catholicism. And as I started reading books about the early church fathers in particular, just like, now Doctor of the Church, Cardinal Newman said that, once you start reading the early church fathers, you cease being Protestant. Very true. Very true. And so I found the church, and my patron saint is St. Ignatius of Antioch. When I read his 7 letters, that put me over the edge. And so I turned to my wife and said, I think we're Catholic. And she had another journey that's been going on in parallel with mine, different than mine. And she was ready to become Catholic too, for different reasons. It had to do with suffering and other things that she said the Catholic Church understands suffering, which is not taught properly in the Evangelical Church.
Yeah.
And that was kind of her journey. And so together we joined RCIA. We at that time lived in San Francisco. I went to a local Dominican-run church there in San Francisco.
What a place to convert.
Phenomenal. I'm still kind of a Dominican groupie to this day.
Yeah.
And so it was a great RCI class, now called OCIA, obviously. And we both entered the church in Easter in 2017.
Wow.
So there you go.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, in a place like San Francisco,
Yeah.
that is so secular. I mean, so steeped in secularism.
But God is working there.
Yeah.
We went there. The church we went to was a Dominican-run parish there in the middle of San Francisco. It had such a good RCI or now OCI program that people from the whole Bay Area would come to OCIA once a week because it was so well taught, so well attended. So my OCI class back in 2016 was, I think we started about 75 people.
Yeah.
For one parish. Think about that, right? So
Wow.
they're doing okay.
That's amazing. Well, we have a chapter in, I guess they'd say South Bay, down San Jose, Silicon Valley area. We are working on a San Francisco chapter. So if there's anyone listening who's in San Francisco and wants to help us get plugged in there more, we'd love to have a chapter there locally as well.
Yeah.
So that's an amazing story of your conversion, right, to the Catholic faith. So throughout that whole period, you're also taking all these pretty significant steps in your professional career.
Yep.
So maybe tell us a little bit about how were there kind of parallel experiences with your conversion, but also how might you have been bringing that into your work as you're growing into positions of pretty significant leadership?
Yeah. So my first third of my career is the way I look at it, which is really quite true. I was a Navy officer, nuclear submarines for quite a few years. Went to grad school after that in around 2000, switched over to kind of my civilian career. And going at that point, I was actually an early Amazonian. So that was around 2002 timeframe. Amazon at that point was about a $3 billion company. They have grown a little bit since then. But it was a small enough company. You kind of knew Jeff Bezos. It was, it's not super small, but it was, on its way, but it's just getting started. And I found at that time is throughout my careers, I went from there to a big company called DHL, which is a big international shipper. Eventually, I became chief supply chain officer at a couple of companies, Office Depot. I was a person that actually built Walmart's e-commerce supply chain from scratch, essentially. Built the team that did that. I did it personally. And then eventually, my last big corporate role was at Nordstrom as chief supply chain officer. I found a couple things along the way. And kind of at a macro level, I ran into a couple companies where I found that it didn't agree with my faith. And so what I meant by that was the morals of the company, the people that were there were less than stellar, for lack of a better word. And you saw, I'm going to use the word shenanigans, that's probably the wrong word, but you saw some things going on that weren't quite, up to snuff, or at least up to my standards as either a Christian or Catholic, depending what time of my life it was, right? And I found that I eventually voted with my feet leaving there. It's not that I had to leave or I wanted to, but I found I never felt comfortable in those positions because it didn't align with my ethos.
Yeah.
And I was trying to treat the folks.
Could you give us a generalized, of course, but is there an example that kind of stands out to you in a situation you were put in?
There's a couple. I think one's a little bit spicy, but one of the companies I worked for, there were a lot of executives that were less than faithful to their spouses.
Yeah, what a shame.
Yeah, and it was pretty out in the open, which is really a little appalling when you think about it, right?
Right.
And that just talks a little bit about the moral character of the folks behind that, right? They did find their day jobs, if that makes sense, right?
Right.
But you can tell they probably didn't have the home lives you probably wish they were, and are they really the authentic person that you thought they might have been, right?
Yeah.
That was kind of one thing. That was kind of the far end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, you saw more of I would call it less about being part of a team, less about a little bit what's in for me as opposed to what's in for the team or for the company.
Right.
And I'm very much let's work together for the common good, if that makes sense. That could be the company if you're getting paid.
Yeah.
That could obviously be for the church if you're working for the church and for souls. But at the end of the day, as your ethos is, you buy in, you're in, right? And it's not just all about you. And that was kind of the lesser end of the spectrum. But if a lot of people are out there for themselves, if you will,
Right.
that usually doesn't sit well with me either. So
Yeah.
those are kind of the spectrum you might see out in the corporate world. I found that you just don't always feel, at least I didn't feel comfortable in those roles, just because you're an ambassador, especially as a senior executive for the company. And I like to be able to go in front of people and say, I work for this company, I'm proud to be there. And sometimes you see that kind of behavior, it kind of taints it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that our members so often are curious to hear about from more seasoned executives like yourself is how do we think about achieving success in work in light of our faith, right? Because on one hand, we are work is a good thing that we are given by God, and we're called to grow in that work and do work excellently. And so we're often promoted for that work and grow into positions of influence and grow our prestige as professionals. On the other hand, though, how do we maintain that kind of humility, that kind of groundedness in the midst, especially when you get into roles where you start to have the word chief before your name in some of the largest companies in the world? How did you stay grounded or think about achievement in light of being Christian and then Catholic?
So that's a great question and a very broad one. But I'm going to start with just where my mind goes quickly. I think the first thing is, I think humbleness. Go back to the Beatitudes a little bit.
Yep.
About the meek shall inherit the earth, right? Is at the end of the day, I think that idea of being humble it's got to be front and center of your life. And how do you get that? And the way I go back to is staying close to the sacraments. So I tried to, even while I was working, try to go to mass as daily as I could, morning mass before work. Obviously, on Sundays, you're doing your Sunday obligation. That's easy. Daily prayer life, getting up early and having a holy hour every day. That, and obviously doing confession at regular intervals, that keeps you humble and grounded. And that's the source of the strength from which everything else, when you walk out of the confessional, walk out of your house every day, walk out of the church, that's what allows you to be the leader you need to be at work.
Yeah.
That's the foundation. So, if you go back to the big three, the holy hour, it's confession and the Eucharist, that's the grounding mechanism. You cannot forego that and be a good leader, Christian leader, a good Catholic leader. So that's step one. The second step is I talk about servant leadership. It's not a new concept, but it's a very Christian concept. And that is the people that work for you, you're there to make them successful, not the other way around. One, that's a humbling type of thing because I'm serving them as opposed to them serving me. I think that's pretty important. And how can I make my employees, people work for me, successful? Because at the end of the day, they make you look good and be successful, right? So it's a servant leadership type of model, right, and mindset. I try to practice that every single day. And a good way is, just practically speaking, I spend a lot of time out and about on either the factory floor or the warehouse floor or even the offices. I spend a lot of time walking around talking to people and trying to say, remember their personal lives. It's kind of a very practical thing. I understand you just had a baby. How'd it go? How's your wife doing? You get the idea, right? Remembering small details about them. People notice and people care. And if a leader pays attention to them, is not locked in their office, or not asking about them, doesn't care about them, they will notice. And we're losing a ton of people in the work world now because corporate America a lot of times doesn't care anymore.
Right.
But as a leader, you can care.
It's that humanity component.
It's a
like
humanity
we're still
component.
people working with people.
If you practice that, people will stick with you. I've had good luck now as I've changed jobs and careers and companies. People tend to follow you because they know they don't know what you are. You're not out there wearing a Catholic name badge on your suit every day, so to speak. But they know you're probably going to mass once in a while to sneak out on a holy day of obligation, or they just heard from somewhere or whatever, and they know how they got treated at work.
Yep.
And they says, I don't know what he has or she has, but I want what she or he has, right? Kind of like when Harry met Sally, right? I'll take what she's having, right? And that's it.
Yeah.
And that's practicing your faith that way. It's a little bit overt, mostly not, right? But people get it over time because you're not dumb.
Right.
And that's the key.
Yeah, this is interesting because that makes a lot of sense when you're in positions of leadership and you're leading a team. I also think about it though for young people. And how can they pay attention, essentially, to the people around them and start to develop that habit of just being connected in a way to people because we're listening and because we actually hear what is important in their life. We hear what's going on. We can ask about that, right? I think that's really important. That habit can be developed starting when they're young professionals in their 20s and 30s, like our YCP members are, right?
Yeah. Well, here's the funny thing. When I was a young 20, 30-year-old, and I was being led mostly, right, at that age, some of that Navy, some of that post-Navy, I was very actively taking a mental list of what not to do. So I had leaders that way. I would say, I would not do that or what to do that, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to what you did see that worked well and you liked, right? And then I recommended to all 20, 30-year-olds is every leader's got their queers. We're all human, all leaders are human beings and have their problems. Make a list of what you like and what you don't like. Combine that with your own personality and develop your own leadership style. Right?
Yeah.
But you can learn
It's going to be authentic to you.
That's correct.
Right. Yeah.
But also you learn just as much from the negative as you can from the positive.
Yeah.
So those are both learning experiences at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And make it your own at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Be authentic.
I love that. And that's a great segue into mentorship, which I know is a really important area that you're investing more heavily in now in this kind of third act of your life, as you put it. So maybe talk a little bit about the power of mentorship more broadly, why you think it's so important, and maybe also about your own personal experience with mentors, or how you became passionate about this idea of mentorship. Because I do think mentors are a key part. We talk about this at YCP all the time. They're a key part of helping us know the list of what works and what doesn't work, and then the support that they provide sometimes to help us become more fully who God has called us to be by helping us unpack and understand ourselves and kind of integrate those areas. Right. So maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, great question. I'm discovering mentorship a little bit from my own the first time, and I'll tell you. The reason I say that is because at my age, when I grew up, there wasn't a lot of mentorship. If it was very off the cuff, for lack of a better word. May or may not happen. Nothing formal for sure. There's very few corporations that did that in a very corporate type manner. And I was lucky or unlucky enough not to have it. I just kind of had to go figure it out on my own. That's unfortunate. That was my kind of 2 cents there, because now I know what I know now. Some of it through the School of Hard Knocks, some of it just through years of experience. I know some good things and some bad things, what to do, what to avoid, right? And I'm anxious to pass it on and be a shortcut, if you will, to the next generation. Right, it's that knowledge transfer type of thing, right? I'm pretty passionate. I think that there's a key success there for that mentorship. And so what I'm looking at right now on my kind of you said, my third active life here, I had the Navy, then I had supply chain career for quite a few years. Now I'm starting to think about giving back a little bit. And mentorship is going to be the epicenter of that, because how do you do that well? How do you find mentors that are passionate about the space of giving back to the next generation? How do you vet them to make sure they're the right kind of mentor? Then last but not least is how do you train them to be better mentors? No one's trained to be a mentor, right? We all can answer yes or no questions to if a younger person asks us about X, Y, or Z. We may or may not know the answer. But if you think about taking all the mentors out there, can you combine, they might have the answers or network out there they can plug into and say, I don't know the answer, but this other mentor I know I can find does have the answer.
Right.
That's the kind of power of networking that I think we need to turn on. Right now, mentorship tends to be one-on-one ad hoc type of relationships, or I think this person might be a good fit because they're in my industry, but they may not be the world's best mentor. They might not have the same background or questions, or maybe their skills are old, who knows, right?
Yeah.
So the key is, I think, finding the right mentors, frankly. There might be one primary mentor, but there might be a network that mentor can feed into that has the knowledge that young person needs to know to really grow and learn down the road.
Yeah.
So I think that's where we need to go down the road, is taking it to the next level. As we think about YCP starting right now with just one-on-one matching, but how do we make this more of a network or a cloud of mentors that can help that person be successful down the road?
Yeah.
That's kind of what I'm starting to think about. It's more of a force enabler or force multiplier of that networking effect down the road. That's where I think we need to go down the road.
I think it's so exciting because the world needs more connection and not less, right? I mean, the number one reason people first come to YCP is because they're looking to form deeper friendships, or maybe just to form friendships at all. I mean, we've got some of the loneliest people that are on record right now in Gen Z. But I think the other aspect that's interesting, you brought up the industry connection piece, because I do think sometimes young people think, in my early 20s, mid 20s, I need someone who's in my industry to be a mentor, right? Because I'm growing in this place that has its unique components. And we found that while that may be important to some degree, for the large group of our members, you're so early in your career that there's broader advice and guidance that transcends your industry.
That's correct.
You're not in those later stages where there's some extremely unique component or skill set or dynamic that you need to figure out. So maybe speak to that a little bit. 20s and 30s, like what would one look for if they're a YCP member looking for a mentor, within YCP or outside in other networks?
So I got one. There's a lot of answers to that one, but I would say I agree with you that industry level knowledge is nice, but it's not the top thing.
Right.
I think the end of the day, especially in your 20s and 30s, is how do I navigate my whole life? So I'm thinking about things like work-life balance. How do I go find a spouse?
Yep.
Right? Which is more of a personal home life. How do I connect socially, not outside of work, into a social personal network? Where do I go engage myself? And finally, is the work connections, right? So what I'm starting to think about, at least how to deal with this a little bit in mentorship, is the question I kind of get from the young folks is, how do I integrate my work life with my personal life, either the social, spouse, or family type of things, right? Not to mention your spiritual life. And I think you and I were talking a little bit before we got on this to talk today. I'm finding is, how do you concretely do that? Right. You go hear people give you platitudes about good leadership and being a good spouse, whatever. You hear how to be a good worker. You hear about how to be a good Catholic, right, from your local priest. But how do you put all that together and have I call it the whole person approach, the whole Catholic? And how do you concretely go from all these nice ideas and abstract ideas to concretely embed them into my life? How do you get there?
Right.
And how do you actually live on Monday what you just heard on Sunday? And that's hard to do. And that takes some experience, frankly. It takes some forethought. And I think that's something where mentors could be really good at helping to show people how you can be a Catholic 365 days a year, 24/7, not just on Sunday.
That's exactly right.
And there's a trick of that. But I tell you what, when you start living that whole life, that whole holistic life, it really does bring happiness and work-life balance because you're not a bifurcated person anymore.
Right. And peace, right?
You're peace with, you're one person that you're Catholic no matter where you go, and that you're grounded in the faith, you have a strong relationship with God, and that spreads to your spouse, to your family, to your social connections, and your work connections. Slightly differently. We're not going to go bring the scriptures into work probably because HR will get after us. At least maybe not here, but at most companies, right? But there are ways to do that by living your faith out there and talking about it and sprinkling that into even your work life.
Right.
That people go, there's something different about Susie or Bob. I know they're Catholic because there's something they talked about that just mentioned casually, and I can see how they're happy and at peace. Right. I want what she's having. I want what he's having. And that opens up the door to those kind of conversations, even at work. I've had people come in, close the door, my office, and ask me a personal question. It had nothing to do with work because they trust my opinion on a personal question because I think they knew I was well-grounded, right? And that's what you want to get to for every single person here, no matter where your cubicle is, where your office is. If people know that you have that relationship with God and that you're at peace, people will come seek you out for advice at the end of the day, either being junior or senior.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I think the mentor relationship is so important. We talk about 5 key relationships at YCP. That's one of them that we really support members to be connected with, right? You've got mentors, you've got peers, just friendships from other people in your stage of life. You've, of course, got the vocational call, most of us to marriage, right? We have many people who beautifully are finding relationships and then even spouses through YCP.
Good spot to do it.
It's great. And also at the same time, people who are discerning religious life and have exposure to different religious orders or diocesan parish life through YCP. You've, of course, got the business relationships, just the kind of more purely professional networking relationships. And then you've got those religious leaders in your life, those sort of spiritual shepherds, whether they're priests or other religious deacons or lay people that are really that kind of spiritual influence, those 5 key relationships. And mentors are such a big part of that at this critical stage in your 20s and 30s where you're making these really important decisions. Really important decisions that are going to vastly, you will end at vastly different positions based on those decisions that you're making. So I think it's important we invest more in this.
Pressure on the 20 and 30-year-olds, but those decisions are crucial.
There's a book called The Defining Decade. I don't know if you've read it, but your 20s are critical.
They are. And being spiritually set up for that and listening to the Holy Spirit and having the right mindset helps you make those right decisions when they come.
Right.
In hindsight in my life, for whatever it's worth, I look back and I wonder how in the heck I made a good decision when I did in my 20s, but it was the right decision.
Yeah.
The good ones, who you marry, right, et cetera. There's other ones too, right? And I'm realizing in hindsight, those weren't my decisions. You can almost see the visible hand of God or the Holy Spirit working in some of those, because I wouldn't have been smart enough to figure them out myself, for sure.
Right.
And you can see how God, if you trust Him and have that reliance, even though you don't see it overtly sometimes, there's a little bit of a hidden hand. It's kind of like Adam Smith's hidden hand of the wealth, right, and money. It's the same idea. It's really amazing to watch in hindsight, but you have to get to a certain age to actually appreciate that.
Yeah.
Which unfortunately I am now. But you all get
Well, that's what's good about YCP is maybe we can learn a little earlier because we can listen to guys like you, right? Who can tell us.
Yeah, that's great for mentorship, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Avoid this or do this. There's advantages to that because it's wisdom, right? At the end of the day. You get a few gray hairs for that, but it's worthwhile. And I wish I had more of that, frankly, when I was growing up in my 20s and 30s. But it also, that was a different time, different generation too, right? I think now mentorship is more accepted and more widely used, and that's good for everybody.
So I've also been thinking about my guardian angel more and just guardian angels in general, because you talk about the decisions that we're making, and there's God's hand in those decisions, even when we may have not been very connected to Him. And as I've started to pray more to my own guardian angel and sort of read a little bit more, it just really reminded me that there's a profound angelic person who is committed to each one of us. And
crazy idea,
I
right?
remembered that, you hear it as a kid and you say this guardian angel prayer sometimes that your parents taught you, but I think there's such a beautiful opportunity to grow that relationship.
Oh, it's amazing. I going back a little bit even higher than guardian angel, as a former Protestant, the fact that you have saints and angels that you can pray to, crazy idea. Right, before you only addressed your prayer to Jesus, God, or whatever, right? When I first became a Catholic, I had to press the I believe button because it just didn't feel natural. But I know it was part of the Catholic faith, and I had accepted on faith.
Specifically, saints and angels.
Yeah, everyone has every Protestant conversion. They'll tell you this has some.
You got to work towards that.
Yeah, it might be about Mary, right? It might be about the saints, something. Some people it's Eucharist and transubstantiation, right? For me, I think praying to saints was like these people, right? That was a little bit of a hard point. My wife had a hard one with Mary. That was kind of her conversion problem, and she read a book by Tim Staples, and that kind of put her over the edge. Oh, okay. That makes sense, right? For me, I've really started, now that I've been Catholic for, since 2017, like fully in the church, I've really dug into that in the last 3 or 4 years, like you have a little bit. And before we got on camera here, we were talking about St. Joseph.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
I just finished up a consecration of St. Joseph last week.
Amazing. Is this Father Donald Calloway's consecration?
Yeah. And I've did a lot of reading, a lot of YouTubing, right? And sorry, I'm a little bit younger generation, a lot of YouTube, a lot of reading. And I felt called that's a saint that I felt familiar with or felt called to,
right?
Not to mention he's part of the Holy Family, and so I went kind of went the next step and bought Father Calloway's book and did the consecration, and what a resource!
Amazing,
right? Now you got Joseph, you got Mary, who's always there with obviously the Rosary and what have you.
Yeah,
Jesus is always there. Now you got the Holy Family kind of pitching for you, right? And then now you start engaging other saints and your guardian angel. That's the way to go through life.
It's amazing.
Right? And
talk about the other 5 key relationships,
right? It's a power that as a Protestant you don't tap into. So the Catholic Church believes Protestants are Christians, although there's some heresy, whatever there. I always tell my Protestant friends is being Catholic is being a Christian with a full toolbox. You got all the tools you need to put the nails in the wall and the screws in, as opposed to trying to drive in a nail in the wall with a wrench, right? Because in the Protestant Church you just have Scripture. You don't pray to the saints. You don't have the Eucharist. You don't have confession. So you're kind of living with a few sacraments, marriage, and the Bible to guide you. That's about it.
Yeah.
And so living with the full toolbox is much easier. So as you develop this consecration of saints and relationship, right, and with your guardian angels you talked about. Wow, what a powerful thing to actually guide your life. I love it.
It's really a gift.
Yeah. And so we can actually become saints like we're called. not because of our own doing, don't get me wrong, but we have to have the will to do that. And now you got people helping you, pulling you along into heaven.
Yeah.
Right? You got your guardian angel directing you. You got Mary and Joseph. You got other saints that you know. You might have deceased relatives that might be, you can have them pray for you now, right?
Yeah.
Now you got a lot of people cheering for you, right? Going across that finish line. It's much easier to do it that way, trust me, than trying to do it on your own.
Do it alone.
It's much easier. Not that the other way can't be done, but it's much more difficult. Right?
Yeah, that's amazing. So how were you exposed to St. Joseph first? And for those who don't know, I mean, our patron is St. Joseph the Worker here.
I did not know that until I walked in here today.
Yeah,
that was a good call, right? Yeah.
But how were you first exposed to St. Joseph?
Somebody
through RCIA?
No, I mean we all know who St. Joseph was, but when it came to the consecration, I talked to somebody, and they were struggling with some virtues or vice, whatever, and they said that he is the key to increasing your virtue.
Yeah.
And he's very powerful for increasing virtue and decreasing vice. And don't we all want that?
Yeah.
Right? We all have something, or some things, right? Plural. And that's how you become a saint, is getting more virtue and less vice, right? By definition, right? And as we try to become more sinless in our lifetime here on earth, right? And that's why I went to St. Joseph. I said, I want that. Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to tap. I mean, I'm trying to tap into that prayer and intercession, right, to allow me to become more virtuous in my life, because we're called to be as saints, right?
Yeah.
Over here on earth. If you think about it, everything else you do in life, nothing else really matters. Right? Your work, your home life, whatever. If you don't get your spiritual life right, then nothing else really matters. So Christ said in Matthew 16, he said, "Who do you say that I am?" Right? He asked the apostles, disciples. At the end of the day, that's an easy question to answer. Well, you're Christ. Okay, true. That's the way Peter answered, right? But at the end of the day, if you dig deep into that, what it really means to you personally, and if you answered you're the Christ, what does that mean to you for your personal life and your walk with Christ and what you need to be doing day to day? And that's the call we really have as Christians. You got to take the next 2 or 3 steps down. Right? You got to keep asking that question. Who do you say that I am? If you answer it, then what are you doing about it? And that goes back to St. Joseph for me, was how do I increase more virtue and less vice?
Yeah. Well, that's an amazing endorsement for people to go pick up his book. We did an entire conference sort of loosely tied to his book and the consecration, which was amazing.
Great book.
That was the first time I'd done the consecration. And now I also have to give a shout out to the Marian consecration. There's various versions of it, but the St. Louis de Montfort version is, I think,
the classic,
widely accepted as the classic, right? So I'm in the middle of that right now, reconsecration. So for people that maybe haven't heard about these beautiful devotions and traditions that the church gives us to devote ourselves to Jesus through Mary, to Jesus through Joseph, with Joseph and Mary, it gets deeper into that richness that our Catholic faith gives us.
Yeah, here's what will blow your mind. Part of my consecration I did last month, just as an exercise, is you don't think much about the Holy Household in Nazareth as Jesus was growing up. Okay, it's like another regular house. You just kind of poo-poo it and move on, right? Until Jesus' ministry when he's 30 years old. What happened there in 30 years? Think about that.
I'm in the middle of it.
What was that house really like? We had this sinless mother and this.
Well, I'm not in the middle of that, but I'm in the sinful part.
And you have the Son of God as the Son. What really went on in that household? How different was that? And you just start thinking about your mind's eye. What did that really look like besides just what you kind of glossed over? Like my house when I grew up. Well, not really, right? It was a pretty amazing thought.
Yeah,
ridiculous.
It is really amazing. There's a lot of reflection that can be done there, right? I think especially as that's probably good for me to meditate on a little bit more as a father of very young kids.
Right.
That's amazing. Well, shifting gears just a little bit, but still talking about young people, of course, you have said that, especially in this next phase, that you're really intrigued by the next generation because they're searching for something deeper. Mm-hmm. They're seeking something more. Tell me a little bit more about that. What is your experience? How have you kind of more understood that? And then we could talk about, what do we do to help address that?
So I've been talking to a lot of young folks, 20, 30-year-olds, just people I've run across, people that friends of, sons and daughters of friends of mine, et cetera. Worked a little with the YCP chapter in Seattle, where I'm based, talked to some of the folks there as well. I would say we are at a unique time, I think, for 20, 30-year-olds, at least in the last who knows when.
Yeah.
I think their life is a lot different than my 20 and 30 years, if you will, probably maybe a little bit yours. I don't know what age you are. Yet life with the internet, social media, I think just the world growing up AI now, which is just going to be massively
next frontier.
disruptive next couple of years. I think they're starting to realize that what we were all told growing up wasn't necessarily true. And that, getting a good job, going to school, getting a good job, probably a white collar job, most of the folks at least listening here, that's the path to happiness, 2.5 kids and 2 cars in the garage, right? And a lot of people realize at my age that when they got to be 40 or 50, that wasn't all that it was meant to be. And I think the younger generation is wiser in the sense they figured out when they're 20 or maybe in 30, not when they're 40 or 50. Good for them, right? But then
They're
the
at
next
least asking
question
the right question.
they're asking the right question. And I think with social media, I think probably with the movement of the Holy Spirit a little bit, they're starting to realize there's more to life than just what I just told, material goods, right? And education or whatever. And I think they're asking that question earlier in life, and good for them, frankly.
Yeah.
So the question is, okay, that's not nirvana where you want to go, then what? And I think our job that have been there before and hopefully figured out that Christ is the answer and the church is the place you want to run to, that's where you get your grounding and everything else comes along for the ride, not the way around. And so the faster and better YCP as an organization, obviously the church in general, the local dioceses and parishes, whatever, can help young people get grounded in the faith holistically and how it affects all parts of their life and get that grounding early and well catechized, well formed.
Yeah.
That will be the future, I think, of the church. And you see right now, since 2020, a lot of young people are not coming back to the Catholic Church. Matter of fact, the trends are reversed to people going out the door versus coming in right now, which is a recent phenomenon in the last couple of years, right? And that's encouraging, but, a couple dots is not yet a trend, right? It's just a couple dots. But I tell you what, the early signs are encouraging that they're figuring out early and good for them. I think our job as an older generation and YCP as an organization is to help them get there faster and get well grounded and well formed.
Yeah.
That's the key.
Yeah, I think a big part of what you're talking about is where do we put our identity, right? Because we can put our identity in lots of different things. If it's in anything except Christ, then there's a high risk that it's going to dissolve and you're going to have a crisis, right? And I think some of what you're talking about is placing your identity too much in your work, right? Or in the successes that you've achieved through your professional life or in the things you've bought because of the money that you've gotten through the work that you've done. All of which on their own are good. They're good things that God gives us, right? But if you start to find your own identity in these things, you run into some real trouble.
It's where you put your treasure, right?
Yeah.
And if heaven's where you put your treasure, and all
store it
stuff else comes from the ride, you'll be a very happy, grounded person.
Right.
Not the other way around.
So, yeah, that's exactly right. Well, as we round out here, you're working on some really exciting plans with some mentorship offerings in Seattle, and then it'll expand out beyond that, I'm sure. We're also developing some exciting things here with mentorship with YCP. But what would you encourage young people who are, within YCP or otherwise, who hear this conversation today to pursue, to maybe start a conversation? Like, where do they begin with seeking?
Yeah, good question. I think
good mentors.
You probably know better this than I do. I think at the end of the day I'd love for it to start via YCP.
Yeah.
So if we could talk to the local chapter president, perhaps to get some names in, get involved with your current mentorship program. As we work together and you work with other organizations as well, let's try to put this on steroids. So let's try to make this network cloud or mentoring cloud, if you will, not just one-on-one relationships, which is a good place to start, but can we connect other things around it to help that mentor become a super mentor, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
Because he or she has resources then to pull in for questions they don't know or opportunities they don't know. Or they can say, hey, I don't know this. Why don't you go talk to this person and start connecting them, right?
Exactly.
That's the power of networking. And so if we can get those network externalities running among the Catholic youth with the older generation of mentors, that's going to be pretty powerful down the road.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty passionate about working with you and whoever else down the road, starting to figure out what that would look like down the road.
Yeah.
And kind of put this on steroids.
Yeah, it's that concept of the web, but how do we strengthen the connections so that it's easier, it's faster, and there's more people increasingly plugged in.
That's right.
So that we can support one another to grow in our faith, grow in our professional lives, grow in our home life, like you talked about, and be surrounded by the right people to
That's exactly it.
to hold us accountable and challenge us to be better better Catholics and
I'm all for it.
hopefully future saints.
That's right. The goal
Saints in the
is-
making, right?
That's the goal. That's the goal.
Good.
So thanks for the
Well,
invite.
final thought, Brent. What would you leave us with here from the conversation as we, many of our listeners are going to go back into work today or tomorrow morning?
Sure, I would say the easy one is strive to be a saint,
Yeah.
right? I think that's all incumbent upon us. We're instructed to do that by Christ, so let's do that. And we use organizations like YCP and others, your home parish, whatever, and the sacraments in particular to strengthen that relationship. And we're here to help you get to be a saint, and that's the end goal in life.
Yeah.
And then you try to be a holistic Catholic, no matter at work, at home, or other kind of social engagements. Be the same authentic person every day.
Amen. And we'll pray for the continued intercession of Saint Joseph
I love it.
in all things.
Love it. Yeah.
Well, good. Thank you so much for being here, Brent. This has been
My
a great
pleasure.
conversation today.
Thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And thank you guys so much for joining us for Refiner's Fire. Check in. We've got tons more episodes with all kinds of Catholic business leaders teaching us how we can better integrate our faith in our work. We hope we'll see you at a YCP event soon, or perhaps at our conference in April 2026 here in Dallas. You can find more information on our website. We can't wait to see you soon, and we'll be praying for you in the meantime.